Hello, friends. Welcome back to another health content writing video. I am excited about this topic in particular because this was supposed to be a part of the Health Writing for Health Professionals 101 series that I published a week or so ago. But I held it out because I thought that it might be information overload. I know there was a lot of information that was being shared in that series. So I decided to kind of wait for this one. So if you'd like, you can consider this a bonus episode or a bonus video as a part of that Health Writing for Health Professionals 101 series. What I want to talk about today is why there are times when becoming a freelance health content writer is going to be a better option than starting your own health blog. So to kind of kick off this topic, I should say up front that I talk to a lot of health professionals, pharmacists in particular, who have learned about health content writing, and they kind of have two pathways in mind. They are thinking about, well, maybe they don't have two pathways in mind, but there are two pathways that they can choose. And sometimes they are only really aware of one of them. And that pathway that a lot of pharmacists are aware of is the ability to kind of start your own blog, whether it's a health blog, a pharmacy blog, some combination of the two. Starting a blog and using that as an opportunity to write more, to get their ideas out to the public, to educate folks who might come across their blog. But what they sometimes don't realize is that there is another option where instead of writing for their own blogs or platforms, you're able to write for an established health company's blog or an established health company's platforms, right? So rather than creating your own blog, you are writing for someone else's. And there are pros and cons that come with both of those options. However, there are a few reasons that freelance health content writing comes out on top. And so we'll talk through some of those advantages as we talk through the pros and cons of both starting your own health blog or writing for a health company in this presentation. So hopefully you find it helpful, and feel free to ask questions, drop comments, or let me know if you learned anything new while you're watching. Okay, so let's start with option one, which is starting your own health blog. Let's talk about some of the pros, the advantages of starting your own blog. If you're anything like me, and I know that you probably are, especially if you're a pharmacist, but you like to have autonomy and ownership over the things that you do and over the work that you do. So, one of the great things about having your own blog is that you are the person who has autonomy and over ownership over all of the aspects of that blog. So, when it comes to deciding what topics are going to be written about, what style or writing style or tone of voice is your content going to have? Who is going to be your audience? Is there a specific group of people that you're going to be writing for? How often are you going to write? With what frequency? How consistent are you going to be? How are you going to promote the content that's on the blog? All of these things you have autonomy and ownership over, which can be nice on the one hand because, again, we like to kind of have a good feel for the direction that our work is going in. At the same time, these can also be cons in a way, and so I'll save that for the con section, but this is one of the potential advantages of starting your own blog. Another is that, especially for folks who are new to health content writing, which a lot of pharmacists and health professionals are, it gives you an opportunity to practice content creation, to practice communicating health information, to practice written patient education in an online format on your own terms and on your own schedule. And so some people find that that can help take some of the pressure to perform off a little bit because if you are the one who has autonomy and ownership over this project, then that means that you aren't really answering to anyone else or having to worry about, whether a client or a colleague or whoever thinks that something is right or something is wrong or something could be better, etc. So it gives you kind of an opportunity to practice in a safe space where there isn't as much external pressure. And because of that, because there's not as much external pressure, the stakes are generally lower. because you aren't necessarily answering to anyone. You can make decisions on your own. So if you decide, oh, like, I'm not feeling it today. I mean, technically, you don't have to do it today if you're not feeling it today. Um, and so these are some potential advantages. And I say potential because all of these have the ability to also be disadvantages depending on how they are being used or applied. So, example, with the stakes being lower, well, yes, the stakes are lower because there isn't as much external pressure, but then that also takes away a key part of accountability or motivation for some people because you might be a person who is more externally motivated than intrinsically motivated. And so, if you don't have that pressure or expectation from other people, then you might struggle with being accountable to what you said you were going to do. Some folks don't have that issue because their motivation is internal or they have some other driving force. But just know that these can also be potential disadvantages as well. So let's talk about the actual cons. The first thing is that unless you have an audience from some other source or from somewhere else, you're going to have to build an audience for your platform from scratch, possibly from scratch, which is incredibly hard. Um, it's not impossible, but it is time and energy consuming to have to focus on building an audience from scratch. So that is something to consider because if your goal in starting a blog is to get critical information out to people, then getting that information to the people who really need it is going to be a key metric of how successful you are. And if your audience is super small, then how does that compare? How does that compare with the metric or the measurement that you set for yourself as a goal for educating patients? That's basically what I just said here. If the audience reaches super low, you might not be reaching a wide enough group of people to make a significant health education impact. And so, if you're really starting this blog for the express purpose of making that impact, then you really have to consider, okay, how do I reach the audience that I'm intending to reach at a size that is not negligible? Also, a key piece to think about here is monetization. So, with I would say the vast majority of people I talk to, they have two goals. One, they want to educate patients on important health topics, and they also want to make money, right? Though it's fine to have both of those as goals. It's fine just to have the money as a goal, but like it's helpful if that's not your only goal. But what happens is when we're thinking about, okay, with those goals in mind, do I start a blog or do I start freelance writing for other blogs? Monetization becomes much more challenging when it comes to the option of starting your own blog. And that is because it takes time to build an audience, to figure out how to monetize, to work out the kinks, to grow the audience, all of these things that come along with monetizing your own blog and really being responsible for that. And because of that, it also ends up being less profitable over time compared to the amount of work that it takes to actually create the monetization in the first place. Um, I think we'll talk about more about monetization when we talk about the freelance health content writing option. So we'll touch on this again there, but just know that if making money through your writing is a goal of yours, then that is going to be much more challenging if you start your own platform than it is if you are a freelance health content writer for an established health company's blog or platform. And also there's the potential for the amount that you're able to monetize to be much lower with starting your own blog. So a quick water break, and then we'll move on to the freelance health content writing pros and cons. All right, so what are the pros of writing for a health company? One wonderful pro is that you're able to utilize whatever resources the company already has in order to support your content marketing and content writing efforts. So rather than having to purchase your own software for every single thing or hardware that you might need for whatever reason, A lot of companies already have resources that are available to you that you'll be able to use to support your content marketing and content writing efforts. Resources also include like designers, web developers, other people who are involved in their content marketing or digital marketing processes who you can work together with to make sure that the content that you're writing is as strong as possible and visually appealing and easy to look at and nice to read and looks nice and all that stuff, right? You're able to work with people that the company already has on board, whether they're employees or whether they're other contractors. That opportunity to collaborate is much more accessible. Also, you're able to write for an existing audience of your ideal readers. So, a lot of times, health companies will already have an audience that is reading their content. And so, rather than having to be hyper focused on building your own audience from the ground, you're able to kind of make sure your information is getting to the group of people who need to see it because that audience is already existing. Now, the company might have a goal of growing and increasing that audience, increasing that traffic. And that might be why they want to work with you as a content writer to begin with, is to help them bring in more traffic and leads. But it's nice to already have a base of folks who you know are going to be reading and learning more about the topics you're writing about. And then, as I talked about before, with writing for a health company's blog, monetization is much more straightforward and attainable, right? You're a freelancer. You have writing services that cost a certain amount of money. You offer those services in exchange for that amount of money. And then that's how you make money as a freelancer. It's a much more straightforward process, much more attainable, and oftentimes much more profitable than trying to monetize your own blog. Okay, everything has drawbacks. So, a couple of cons or disadvantages for writing for a health company's blog. When how the way that we talked about autonomy and ownership as an advantage for starting your own blog, the opposite is true when you're writing for a health company's blog. You're going to be expected to adhere to whatever that company's guidelines are around their editorial practices. So, their writing style, their tone of voice, um, sometimes the topics that you're going to be writing about. Although, oftentimes, they kind of look at you as a resource for being able to help them think of topics that would be great to write about. But at the end of the day, they have the final say on these things. So it's not that you don't have any input, but it's that you don't have the final say. And so at the end of the day, you are going to have to adhere to whatever guidelines the company sets out or whatever you collectively agree to. Another con is that there are processes it's not a con that there are processes for reviewing content, but the con is that it takes sometimes a long time for all of the stakeholders who need to review a piece before it gets published to actually review that piece. And taking a piece of content through that review process it can be challenging and a little bit frustrating sometimes, to be honest, depending on how many stakeholders are involved, at what stages they're involved, how that process works. Um, this is something that takes some time and skill to be able to navigate efficiently or as efficiently as possible, but it can be a potential disadvantage in this case. And then the other disadvantage, mostly for pharmacists and health professionals, is that content marketing or content writing experience is preferred. And I would say, for most cases, it's necessary, not just preferred. So a company is not going to necessarily want to give their money to a person who they don't know has the ability to be an effective health content writer. And so, because of that, they're going to want to see evidence of experience or proof of the ability to write health content well. And a lot of times, what they will ask for in order to demonstrate this is a portfolio or a collection of samples that they can see so that they can see your work, your writing style, and evaluate whether or not you would be a good fit for their organization. So it's a disadvantage if you don't have that experience, right? If you don't have that portfolio, if you don't have any samples, then obviously that's a disadvantage because in that case, the odds of you being selected as a contractor, or if you happen to be applying for like a full-time role, you're 9 times out of 10, you're not going to be a good candidate for that role if you don't have the experience to demonstrate. So these are some potential disadvantages for writing for a health company's blog over starting your own blog. At the end of the day, in order to evaluate which option is going to be better for you, there are 2 questions you need to ask. First, what are your goals? We talked about this earlier. If your goal is to educate as many patients as possible about about your area of expertise, and if your goal is to monetize and make money from the writing that you're doing, then more likely than not, freelance health content writing is going to be a better option for you than starting a blog for the reasons that we talked about earlier. Okay, which option best supports those goals? Right? So if your goal is, I just want to have fun and I want to be able to have complete autonomy and control over the content that I'm writing, well, starting a blog might best support that goal. If your goal is, I want to educate patients, I don't really care about money at all, I probably won't do this for money, just something as a hobby or a passion project, well, starting a blog might best support that goal. But if your goal is to cast a wide net, right, to really engage in the public health impact that health content writing can have by making sure your ideas and your writing reaches the audience that actually needs to see it, freelance health content writing might best support that goal. If your goal is to make money from that, freelance health content writing might best support that goal, right? So these are the 2 questions that you can ask yourself to figure out which of these options might be right for you at this point in time. And it's totally fine for your answers to these questions to evolve. Like right now, you might answer one way. 3 years later, 3 years down the line, you might answer a different way. And that's fine because we're people and our goals and our priorities evolve. So if you have any questions about anything we talked about today, feel free to leave them in the comments and we can continue the discussion. But hopefully this was helpful for you and helped give you some insight into what the advantages and disadvantages of starting a blog and becoming a freelance health content writer are. So at this point in time, by the time you're seeing this, it's possible that the May cohort of health professionals to health writers has been filled. But if you might be interested in joining the waitlist for the program, you can still leave the comment right in the comments. If applications are still open, then we'll talk about how you can apply. But that program basically is for people who are interested in the freelance health content writing part, not in the starting your own blog part. That support is not provided in the program. Health professionals to health writers helps pharmacists learn how to replace a portion of their income through freelance health content writing specifically. So if that is something that interests you, feel free to leave the word right in the comments and we can talk about it some more, take it from there. And I hope you all have a good evening.